everyone, this is Angelica Honko with Public Advocates. Thank you for joining us. We're just still allowing some attendees to get on. We're also streaming this webinar live on Facebook Live from Public Advocates page, and we'll be getting started shortly.
If you've joined, we're just giving folks 2 more minutes before we get started. Welcome. All right, good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Nashla Gomez. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Capacity Building Manager at Californians for Justice. So a little bit about our organization. Californians for Justice is a statewide youth-powered organization, and we fight to improve the lives of communities of color, immigrant communities, low-income communities, LGBTQ folks, and other marginalized people. We have offices in San Jose, Fresno, Long Beach, and Oakland, California. And CFJ was part of the coalition of grassroots and advocacy groups that helped to pass the local control funding formula. And our young people, 2 of whom will be with us today, were leaders in winning specific student voice requirements in the law. And CFJ leads a professional learning network for educators specifically focused on tackling racial equity challenges. In the chat, we'd like you to please share your name, the organization that you're with, your pronouns, and how are you and why did you join today's call? That's a lot. Do your best. So your name, your organization, how are you doing, and why did you join today's call? Panelists, you can also share, but you will also be sharing out loud in a moment. It's up to you. I'm not seeing responses. Are folks being shy? Okay. Yay. Oh no, folks were just typing. That's great. Welcome. Richmond, National Center for Youth Law. Azusa, California. Coachella Valley. Amazing. So as y'all continue to respond, I want to acknowledge our close partners at Public Advocates who helped to organize this learning opportunity. CFJ and Public Advocates have worked closely together on education justice issues for nearly 2 decades. I know that's a long time. So just to share some agreements for our time together, if possible, rename yourself on Zoom with your name, your pronouns, and maybe your organization. You can see the way I have done it on my screen. Another agreement that we have compassion for us as we navigate through technological challenges. We have folks joining from our San Jose office who have been experiencing some Wi-Fi issues. So if that happens, we'll push through. Do whatever you need to stay present. You know, webinars can be hard. We cannot see you, but it will break our heart if you're not paying attention or if you zone out. So do your best to stay present and ask. And the last agreement that we asked for, ask questions that are helpful to your work, right? Like there will be space during today's webinar for you to ask the panelists questions. Ask questions that are helpful to your work. Can we agree to that? You can do a thumbs up, even though I cannot see you, but I hope that your thumb is up. Great. We will be recording this webinar to make it available on demand, and we are also broadcasting it live through the Public Advocates Facebook page. Now I'm going to turn to our panelists and ask them to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Rosa.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Rosa de Leon, and I am the Organizing Director for Californians for Justice in our San Jose region.
Hi, everyone. My name is Neda. I'm using Zoe and Christina's mic for now because mine is being rude. But I'm an organizer with San Jose I'm an organizer with CFJ in San Jose, and I work with some of the different schools that we work with and with the district as well in the LCAC process.
Hi, my name is Zoe Chand. I am from Piedmont Hills High School. I'm a sophomore.
Hi, my name is Christina Bell. I'm a junior at Silver Creek High School, and we're both on the LCAP board.
Amazing. Thank you to all of our panelists. You'll get to hear from all of them today. Before we jump in, I'm going to ask us to take a collective breath together. Let's take two. Let's take 2 deep breaths together to ground ourselves for today's webinar. So wherever you are, if it's possible for you to put your feet on the ground, do that. If you're sitting, make yourself a little bit more comfortable. If you're comfortable, you can close your eyes. If not, simply lower your gaze. And when you're ready, take a deep breath that you can feel all the way down to your belly. Hold it for a moment and exhale. One more. Exhale. And as you're ready, you can open your eyes and come back into the space. Thank you. We'll have dedicated time for questions and answers later in the webinar, so please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to enter your questions as they come up. I will now pass it on to Rosa to provide further context and history of our partnership with Eastside Union High School District. And I hope that you all received the case study that we shared before today's call, and you can reference that. I will begin sharing a slide deck as well.
Thank you, Nashla. And thank you everyone for joining us again, Rosa de Leon with Californians for Justice in San Jose. We're really excited to share the work that we've been leading along with student leaders here in Eastside Union High School District to make sure that the LCAP is a meaningful process for our youth and families. As many of you know, 2013 was a historic year for education in California since we got the local control funding formula approved. It not only came with ways to make funding more equitable and making sure that schools with high need students receive more funding, but it also had important requirements around student and community engagement. So CFJ student leaders have been playing a key role to put together and putting a student voice on the map, right? At the beginning, there was only requirement for parent engagement. We advocated at the statewide level to ensure that student voice and engagement was also part of that. And we've been working closely with Eastside Union High School District and other districts to make sure that that happens. And today you're going to be hearing about the process in Eastside Union High School District. So we do want to highlight that we have a partnership with the district of many years. We started organizing in this community since early 2000. So we've seen different administrators throughout that time and have been working in creating a strong partnership with them. So they have been one of the districts that has been most willing and open to collaborate with us in making this happen. This has been going from adopting bilingual certification, right, in the early 2000s to making sure that there is college preparedness for all students. There is also leaders in the district that have been willing to try new things and work with us along this way. So we do want to highlight a few of the approaches, right, that we have been using with Eastside Union. As many other districts, right, there was a lack of system in place in LCFF to ensure community and student engagement. This was new for all the districts throughout California, and we've been working in partnership with them to ensure that the youth engagement is meaningful, not only in paper, but that our youth and our parents and our families see that as well. There was limited internal expertise in how to make this happen, how to build this capacity. So as a youth organizing organization, that was a value that we've been bringing to this process through these years. And also creating buy-in, right? And why do we need to, and how do we create processes to involve students and parents to co-create solutions and deciding how funding is being allocated in our school district. So there have been some approaches that we've been using that you can see on your screen. And we wanted to highlight these three as they have been key in this process. The first one is consultation and information gathering, co-designing of new approaches and practices, and diversifying and expanding community participation. For consultation and information gathering, the first step in supporting Eastside Union to address their challenges and lift up student voice was assigning and facilitating biweekly information gathering and brainstorming meetings in order to make sure that there were diverse perspectives in the table to address challenges and getting ideas for improvements on the LCFF and local control accountability plan engagement process. So this was a strong partnership in figuring out what are different things that we could try on. In co-designing new processes and practices, we at Californians for Justice helped Eastside Union establish 2 advisory committees to ensure that there is greater buy-in and participation and a long-term success, right? This is not a one-year process. This is something that is ongoing. These committees are the LCAP, LCAP standing for Local Control Accountability Plan. And there is a student advisory committee, and you will get to hear from the youth that are part of that committee today as well. And it is made up of student representatives from each one of the high schools. So Eastside Union only has high schools in the district. It's not a unified district, and there is representation for each one of the high schools in this space. The LSAC committee meets 4 times a year, and they provide a new structure to bring students to district-wide decision-making and process design and implementation for LCFF. And also the other committee is the District Advisory Committee, DAC-DLAC. And this is made up of district staff, parents, students, community members who meet monthly to provide ongoing advice to the superintendent and the Board of Trustees with a particular focus on English language learners. And as you can see, this goes beyond student participation. So initially we played a leading role in these committees, right? And we are providing guidance to the school staff. They began thinking more about leadership responsibility to facilitate the LCAP one-on-one trainings, building equitable goals and decision-making, and also gathering street data, right? To make sure that we hear from people across the districts. So now CFJ provides ongoing advisory support as needed to shape these two committees and facilitate. And the last one is diversifying and expanding community participation. We worked with Eastside to broaden the reach and impact by moving the engagement work from the district level to the school sites and distributing responsibility and ownership across the sites, making sure that there is more collaboration with the family liaisons on each one of the high schools, and inviting students from different schools to serve on the LSAC. Right now, there is a good representation from the 12 high schools in the East Side, so students engage in this process. And also practicing targeting outreach to understand and to make sure that underrepresented groups in our district are part of their process and their needs are being lifted through this process. And that can help us address any existing racial disparities that youth of color are facing in Eastside Union. Some of the results that we've seen through this process is getting, working with the district and centering the LCAP work on the relationship center schools approach that CFJ has been leading in different high schools throughout the state. Now a relationship center schools approach, not only did the district committed to adopt a resolution in support of this approach, but also RCS, or relationship center schools, shape the multi-tier systems of support equity plan and inform the LCAP language each year as we move forward. And the other piece is equitable distribution of responsibilities and ownership. So we have been evolving, this work has been evolving, and now it's grounded in school sites, right? There is a strong engagement from principals to engage in this process, making sure that families, that parents and students in their school site are able to be part of the LCAP process. The number 3 is result is broader and deeper community engagement. Well, students and families were previously engaged in a more superficial, light way. There had been a shift in the perception that has led to understanding student voice as crucial in these processes. For students to be seen as valuable, worth being incorporated into decision-making processes in our district. And this is beyond LCAP, right? This has even resulted in having students being part of budget advisory committees to decide where funds, to make any budget decisions beyond the LCAP bucket of funds. And number 4 is greater student equity and influence. Educators have opened up to centering race in discussions with youth about opportunity gaps and students' personal experiences at school, which we think it's a huge win. Last year, there was a school climate survey, right, that is sent out to schools every year. There was a question around race that the students from the LSAC committee wanted to make sure was reflected. So this is a way in which we've also been making an impact in bringing equity to our school district. And I will pass it back to Nashla.
Yes. Wow. Thank you so much, Rosa. That was a lot. And you can see all of those details in the case study that was sent out. So hopefully you're following along there as well. And just really appreciate you, Rosa, being able to share with us like the work of many years in 10 minutes. Amazing. I know there are questions that have come up so far, so continue to drop those in your Q&A box. And you can use the chat as well to have conversations with each other as we go along. We are now turning over to our panel. And the first question is for Rosa. So the question for you, Rosa, what are some of the major takeaways from CFJ's partnership with the district? I think you named some, but what are some nuggets that you can share with us?
Yeah, am I muted? I am not muted. Okay, this is good. So yeah, some of the, as I mentioned, right, this is a long-term partnership. We've been working with them for over 10 years, but at the center is definitely the organizing and advocacy that students have led, right? And centering on what are the needs that are coming up for students and parents too in the district. That has been key to the work that has been going on in Eastside Union. And also the strong leadership that the district has had. I think that's been really important in building a partnership where we can move forward and achieve great outcomes for youth in our community. Cultivating a relationship is key, and sometimes, you know, it is rough, but it is very important for community-based organizations to work hand in hand with district officials and administrators, right, to achieve the outcomes that we need for our youth. The other piece is that sometimes the challenge is, who do you build relationships with, right? Is it only at the district level? Or does it also call to build relationships with folks in the school site? In order to make any like meaningful changes that are lasting, it is important to connect with the principals as well that are doing the work more directly with families, with students, and also recognizing that there are different needs by each one of the school sites. And last but not least, is important to talk about race, right? I think that is often the elephant in the room. It helps to name it. It is important to take risks, right? And even though it's sometimes a difficult conversation to have, that is where real change, you know, continues to happen, both at the personal level and school-wide.
Amazing. Thank you, Rosa. The next question is for Neda. Neda, can you talk to us about the LCAP Student Advisory Committee? We want to get a sense of what it looks like, what happens during the meetings, and what have been some of the victories from having that space of student decision-making and student advisory?
Yeah, absolutely. What was the first question? Kind of the breakdown of what the Student Advisory Committee looks like. So essentially, the LSAC, or the LCAP Student Advisory Committee, meets 4 times a year. So each meeting is a 4-hour meeting from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. And basically throughout the year, it's essentially like an LCAP training to gear students to be ready to make recommendations for the LCAP that would then be taken to the Associate Superintendent of Instruction, who then makes those recommendations, of course, to the board of the district. And so, for example, like our first meeting of the year is geared around having discussions about students' experiences at school, letting students learn from each other, because even within like a high school district, like each school looks different. Each student at each school has different experiences. So letting them talk about their experiences, letting them talk about their different experiences with a lot of these like indicators such as race, their gender, sexual orientation, as well as like income status and the way that all of these different things impact their different experiences. And then we use the second the meeting to kind of start that training on like the LCAP process. What is the LCAP? Who else is involved in making recommendations for the LCAP, right? Because it's not just students. There are, of course, the committees that the parents are involved in. There's a district advisory committee. There's a district English language Advisory Committee or English Learner Advisory Committee. And then talking about like what the dashboard is, how like success, how the district and the state of California are measuring success. So it's like an LCAP 101 training, as well as having conversations then around like what equity is and how to begin understanding like school funding through a lens of equity. So like taking into consideration all the conversations that were happening that during that first meeting about like different experiences, different needs that students have, how then what are solutions for them? What are like ways that we start like thinking about them through a lens of school funding that serves that seeks to serve every student's need where they're at. And then our third meeting, we started talking about something that the district does is it puts out a survey every year. And this survey is distributed to every single person in the district. And that includes students, that includes teachers, that includes staff, as well as parents. And so students are actually the ones who get to make recommendations about some of the language and the questions that are in the survey. So this past LCAP meeting 3 or LSAC meeting 3 was actually in January, and students put together a bunch of recommendations for some of the language around the wording of the questions, as well as like some other questions that they wanted to see included in the survey. And then we take those back to the district, and the district basically incorporates them into the survey. And then the final meeting of the year is when students then get together and look at all the survey data. So this is essentially meant to be like data that's reflective of the experiences of students who are not represented in the LSAC, right? Because the idea of the LSAC is that it should be students who otherwise wouldn't have their voice heard or don't necessarily have access to making their voice heard otherwise. But the theory doesn't necessarily mean that that is how it always works out. And so students like to make sure that the questions are worded in such a way that they're accessible to everybody in the district, all the students and the families in the district, and to get that data about, you know, different other students' experiences and like needs. And then during that final meeting, they then make recommendations around what they need. And so I saw a question come up, like if we could have an example. I can definitely give you an example. So last year, so this LCAP process takes a year, and then it determines the recommendations for next year's LCAP. So the LCAP process last year, for example, one of the needs that students identified was the most important was that they needed more counselors. The student to counselor ratio in the district is like really not amazing. And students, it ranges anywhere from like one counselor is in charge of like 400 students to 500 students. And so because of that recommendation, which was then taken to the school district board, the school district then used LCAP money to hire 9 new counselors in the district. So that's like one example of like ways that student needs were actually met through this LSAC process. But yeah, Najla, I think I answered one question. I know that you had more questions, but I forgot what they were.
No, I think you hit it. I think you hit all of them. One of them was around a win that you could talk about, and so you ended up landing that one. But you know, in the Q&A, we will come back to you.
Okay, cool.
And I'm gonna turn it over to our student panelists, Christina and Zoe. What has your experience in the LSAC been like? What have you learned? What would you like other communities to know about the importance of engaging students in district decision-making processes?
Okay. So honestly, my experience being on LCAP was really empowering. Just the fact that by going to these meetings, I get to hear and listen from students from different walks of life, from different high schools, was so amazing. And to actually feel that my voice and my opinions were important. And I think that's why LCAP is so crucial, and especially why we need to keep incorporating different diverse student leaders in this LCAP process. one thing that really shocked me were the surveys. It's like when students get these surveys, they're like, oh my God, like another piece of work that we have to do, right? And it's that feeling like, oh, I just want to rush and get through this, right? But I think by being on the LCAP and realizing how important this survey is to really address the needs that that the district could be addressing and how our money could be allocated is so important. Like I go to Silver Creek High School, and I found out last meeting that only like 20 people out of the 2,000 students at my school filled out the survey. And it's my first time being on the LCAP. So by taking this initiative, I really hope that once we have the survey finalized, that once I go back to the school, I want to mandate that the whole student body fills out the survey, and that the school administration at my school takes this really into importance. And I think communities should know that incorporating student voices is so crucial, because this is another essential perspective. Like, who better to tell you their thoughts and their opinions than the students who are living these communities and living the school life in these districts. And also by incorporating student voices, we're creating a safe, open, inclusive community and space where students feel comfortable enough to share their thoughts, their opinions, and that we're valued and seen as important.
I couldn't have said it better. I've been a part of the LCAP for 2 years, and I 100% agree with what Christina's saying. And I feel like the surveys that we've been creating are going to make a huge impact on our school and the way we allocate our money.
Thank you. I'm really inspired. Y'all are amazing. So that concludes like the first round of questions for y'all as panelists. Before we take questions from all of our webinar participants before our Q&A, we wanted to give folks a couple of minutes to reflect on what you've heard so far, both from the context presentation to the perspectives from the organizer on the ground to our student leaders. We want you to take a moment to reflect. What is coming up for you from what you've heard, and what questions do you still have? All right, so I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Please take a moment to reflect, and we'll be back. Welcome back. That was 2 minutes. Welcome back, welcome back. So as we come back, we also want to have you all engage a little bit more in the chat. So I'm going to ask you 2 questions that you can answer in the chat. The first one, like, what does your advocacy or your organizing or your work around the LCAP look like? So I think it would be helpful to see who's here and what does your LCAP involvement look like? And then what lessons have you learned that you want to share with other participants in the webinar? So I'm going to put those questions in the chat. And it would be great for y'all to share your answers in the chat. So what does your advocacy organizing work around the LCAP look like? What lessons have you learned? Take a moment to type that. As we land our Q&A questions. So if you I hope you're putting your questions in the Q&A box. We're gathering those. Are folks typing or are you being shy? I don't know. I don't believe that nobody has lessons to share. Don't be shy. We want to hear from you. Hashtag student voice. Yes. Okay, well, we're going to continue, but I hope that you're typing so we can learn from each other. I'm going to ask the Q&A questions now. All right, so we have a question about recruitment. So how did you recruit and retain students and families to serve on the LCAP and DLAC? So whoever of our panelists wants to take that up, can be a couple of you. Yes, folks were typing, great.
So that is a great question. I can speak super briefly to the LSAC from the district end, which is essentially that the district basically gives that task to each principal. So each principal is responsible for kind of like recruiting students to the LSAC. They are asked to try to find more unconventional ways of bringing students in, because the idea is that it shouldn't just be, students who are involved in a lot of extracurriculars, who are in leadership, etc. And so a lot of principals will reach out to counselors to do that. But I will say that there's no way to guarantee right now that that every student hears about the LSAC and knows that it's an opportunity to serve. So actually pass it super briefly to Zoe and Christina if they want to share how they got involved.
Okay, so honestly, if I'm gonna be honest, how my school dealt with recruitment for LCAP was kind of really unconventional. So a staff member basically sent out a school email to the whole student body if they were interested in joining the LCAP advisory board, and then whoever replied would be considered, and then yeah, that was pretty much it, right? But I honestly wish that my school actually took it more seriously, because then what Neda was saying, then we would have a more diverse student board, students who feel like their voice should be represented more, right? And have a more diverse and variety.
And for Piedmont, the way that they recruited is through AVID. So the AVID teacher would pick a student or 4, and that would go through the principal. And from there, the principal would choose a student from each grade level. And then from there, we would move on and be chosen to be a part of the LCAP.
I will add that in terms of parent representatives, especially on the district advisory committee and the district English language advisory committee, those are recruited through each school's ELAC or English Language Advisory Committee, and traditionally that role primarily falls to each parent involvement specialist to do the recruitment and let parents know about the opportunity to serve on that committee.
Excellent, thank you. Next question. What, if any, training did students receive in order to maximize their power and understand both local control funding formula and the LCAP process?
Okay, so the training happens during the LSAC meeting. So like I said, during the second LSAC meeting, we did like an LCAP 101. We essentially spent almost all the time talking about what the local control funding formula is, the history, doing a deep dive into the process, all the different committees that are involved in like making recommendations for the LCAP, as well as like looking at like each school's and each district's markers on the dashboard. Do y'all want to say a little bit about what it was like for you doing that training during the meeting in December?
So I've been doing this for 2 years, as I said before, and I feel like the way that during the first meeting, was the introduction of how the LCAP works, and that gave us a greater understanding of what we're going into, and yeah.
It's my first time serving on the LCAP board, and what I thought was very crucial was that we were sparking conversations. We were asking very deep questions about how has race, your gender, your sexual orientation has affected you as a student, as a youth, right? And from that, we got to hear from like different opinions and thoughts from students from different backgrounds. And one thing I liked is that we also got to learn more about how LCAP and how they serve. So one fun fact I learned was that LCAP really tries to aim to target students who are in need, people who are low income, people who are homeless, runaways, orphans, etc. And one activity that we did is that we looked at past surveys and the results for the surveys, and from that we kind of edited the current survey questions to how we feel would get the best results and the best data.
Great, thank you. So the next question, how has the student engagement work had an impact on school culture in the day-to-day? And has it impacted the decision-making culture of the district? I think it's two questions, a little bit different. So what's the impact of the school level and then district culture?
Okay, so this is my first time being, so I'm gonna relay, it's my first time. So honestly, I had no idea about the LCAP until that email was sent out on recruiting, right? What I feel is that it hasn't really affected school culture because I believe I'm from Silver Creek, and I believe the past representatives didn't really bring the importance of what LCAP actually means to our school. So what that means is that as a student representative, that when I come back, when we get that survey finalized, that I'm gonna come back to my school, tell my student administration, my student body, the importance of this survey and what LCAP truly means.
And from my point of view, since I did this last year, we implemented counselors, which has made a tremendous impact on the student body. We get more time with our counselors, and it's affected us in a positive way. Also, the surveys, the way that our school did it was we put it on School Loop, and we also had the science classes have each of their students take it. So there's more people to take our survey from our school.
I don't know if who wanted to take the district culture. I think we talked about it a little bit in the beginning, but if there's anything else around the decision-making culture of the district.
I could add a little bit to that. I think that the LSAC is one space, right? There is other places in which we've been working with Eastside to make sure that there is a student voice in decision-making spaces. I will say like at the district level, they are trying, but it is, again, relying a lot in this partnership. A lot of like NEDA's expertise, right, and engaging students in this process to make sure that it's meaningful for students like Christina and Zoe. So that is like really, really important. And something that I would also add is that 2 years ago, we had feedback from students in the LSAC about, we come and give input, but we don't know what the outcome was. So we took that seriously, and we made sure that we work with the district and the assistant superintendent, that's our contact for this, for the LSAC committee, to make sure that we have a loop, right? We get back to student leaders that are part of this process about these are the outcomes, and this is what's happening because of your input.
Thank you. I think that feedback loop and like just knowing where the feedback is going and what is being done about it is a key part. Even if it's like, okay, we took your feedback, but we weren't able to like allocate resources this time for these reasons, makes a big difference to keeping the trust of the community, which was one of the questions that was also asked. So thank you to our folks raising questions. Where can we access sample surveys that have been created? And we will plug a resource at the end of today's webinar where we have at least the questions that we have developed and co-developed. So look out for that link. But if others want to share in the chat, if you have your own resources around survey development, please do. Next question. We have a lot of good ones. Let me see. Who do you think is still underrepresented or unrepresented as part of the process, and why? It's a broad one, so you can choose how you want to answer it. And yet, I know you've talked about it a little bit already, but if there's anything more you want to say around that.
So I think a student group that comes up a lot in conversation, but doesn't get to be represented, I think, or I haven't seen represented in like either of the advisory committees, is students with disabilities. And so even though this is a student group that is not named as one of the like 3 student groups that the LCAP specifically legally is meant to support, they're like primarily they're very impacted by, of course, like where funding is allocated, and like in every measurement of data that we look at, like in the dashboard especially, you always see the ways that like if when you're breaking down students by race, even like breaking them down by like students with disabilities versus students without disabilities, like the things are different. So for example, like even among like high suspension rates for like Black and Latinx students, students with disabilities face even more impacted by high suspension rates. And so that's something that's like a group that I'd say it's still not necessarily represented in the spaces where all these conversations are happening, and they're being named in the conversation. So, but they aren't, but I guess we're not really doing a good enough job to bring them into those conversations. But do y'all have any ideas about other underrepresented groups?
It's not one that comes to mind.
Great. Thank you. So another big question, how did you identify LCAP as a place where students could have impact toward changes they wanted to see? So we know there are many different places where decision-making happens, kind of like why LCAP? For anybody.
Okay, I think my answer to that would be the LCAP is a little special because it's like almost an extra fund of money that and that is like legally required to engage families and students. And so we have also like worked to engage students in other ways in like decision-making processes. So like Rosa mentioned earlier, that this year like CFJ was invited to be in budget advisory committee spaces for the district, and we brought students along with us. And so we have students in those spaces. But the LCAP is a little special because it's almost like the LCAP is like an untouchable fund of money, where like even when the budget can be affected by declining enrollment or whatever, the LCAP money is still there. And so like the needs that students have and the things that they want to ask for are still possible because this LCAP money remains relatively the same amount every year, as opposed to like the general fund, which basically oscillates often. But those are my thoughts. I'll open it up to Rosa or Zoe or Christina if they have thoughts too.
I will just add that, yes, what Neda said, and it is a requirement, right, of the local control funding formula. We wanted to make sure since the beginning that it was a meaningful process, right? That this was not something that was done on paper of like, I said, I don't know, did this that may be on the surface, but that it really meant something for Eastside youth. And that is why there is this investment of like working in partnership with the district and making sure that there is that students see the impact of their participation in the budgeting priorities. So there is already this process, right? How do we strengthen it, and how do we make sure that our youth priorities are there?
Excellent. Thank you. So we're going to take a couple more questions and then we're going to wrap up. So I will ask this one. So to what extent are students in the committees looking at school and student data as part of the process? And then I know there was a question in the chat around the use of the dashboard. So if you can talk a little bit about what's the data that helps guide some of the conversations in the LSAC.
Hey, you all are muted in San Jose right now.
Sorry, we were just discussing who would answer the question. But I forgot the question for a second. Okay, how we look at student and school data. So we, something that's like a little bit tricky is that sometimes students come into the space and they have a lot of ideas about changes they want to make at their school. And so there needs to be like a reminder that this is like a district-wide process, and that these would be like about the like recommendations would need to be about like funding and programs that are like district-wide and not just like a specific school thing. Like, so for example, there was one meeting where a student wanted to talk about like the electronic devices at the school, and then like other students responded and were like, oh no, this is a district-wide thing. This is like, anyway, where I was going with this is essentially that like when we do look at data, and like maybe y'all, if you want to, can share about what it was like looking at the dashboard and looking at specifically where each of your schools are like doing to, how successful each of your schools is in like achieving the LCAP goals. So like where suspension rates are at, graduation rates, English language assessment, like math, stuff like that, to kind of determine a little bit more about like how to guide some of the questions on the survey, so that the larger population of students at the school can like give their feedback. I don't know if that makes sense. but essentially we use like school data and student data to guide more of a conversation about like, well, what more do we want to measure aside from just like these stats? What more do we not see? Like about like experiences with race, experiences with et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if you all maybe want to speak to what it was like looking at the dashboard and like looking at your different schools, while also thinking like of this as a district-wide process.
Okay, so when we're looking at the dashboard, I think it was at the first or second meeting, I got a greater understanding of like our suspension rates and low income and English learners, how they're affected. And I like it was eye opening because I didn't know that these numbers were so high, and yeah, it was just very eye opening.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay, so last question, and it's really about kind of like how you're developing that relationship with the district while continuing to strongly hold them accountable, right? I think we've built a relationship at Eastside Union for, as Rosa mentioned, 10 years. What does that like accountability look like? And are there any like best practices around how we work with the district that haven't already been named?
I will say that, you know, like the partnership exists because we see the willingness and like the willingness from the current administration, right, to work with us, not walk on their own and having us follow. I think that that has been something important. And at the end of the day, right, like it is a vehicle to make sure that our students and parents have what they need in their communities. I also see, you know, another question kind of connected to that about like partnership with the district versus, you know, the needs of schools and families. The way that we look at it is that this partnership is part of the how we get to that goal of making sure that youth, especially youth of color in our communities, have what they need to have a better education. So yeah, it's part of the process, right? And the reason why there is a strong partnership is because they've been willing to like work with us, and we have find a common interest in yeah, being together. There is still accountability, right? There are still like some spaces where we need to negotiate, and we need to make sure that, you know, we put forward the needs that are coming from the youth. I don't know if Zoe or Christina or Neda would like to add to that.
I know that one way that you can get involved is by attending the district board meetings and actually saying public comments and inputting their opinions and thoughts, right? And I know someone also talked about how do we really engage families and others. So at our school, we have like, for example, like opportunities or like conferences where parents can come by. And I believe that since we're student representatives, it's more easier to talk to students and really engage them on like, this is so important, because when an adult comes in, it's like, oh, it's like, okay, they're just gonna be talking about the logistics. But when a student talks in, it's more personal, more engaging. And I believe that by sharing, by youth sharing their thoughts to other youth and encouraging them to join, it increases participation and also encourages them to come to these board meetings and share their thoughts and opinions as well.
I couldn't have said it better.
Like ditto, y'all are a great team. Thank you so much. So just like big hand to our panelists. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing about your work over the past few years. Appreciation for everyone who joined the webinar and who are sharing resources and great questions on the chat. Apologies that we didn't get to all the questions, but there will be more webinars and more information spaces throughout the month. Hashtag we make LCFF work, follow that. So again, thank you to all of our panelists. For more resources on CFJ's school transformation work, putting more information on the chat. So the resources that I talked about earlier, the free resources, including survey questions, edport.caljustice.org. So edport, edport.caljustice.org. Create an account there and you'll have access to a number of tools, classroom tools to district tools to meeting agendas for doing school transformation work. Public advocates will send out a recording of this webinar and all of the resources that we've shared today. We appreciate you taking a moment to fill out a short survey. So I believe either there's going to be a screen share or I can just paste it on the chat. Pasting it on the chat. Okay, so please complete that short survey. Follow the hashtag WeMakeLCFF Work on Twitter and Facebook, and sign up to receive updates. I'll also put this sign up on the chat so you can receive updates this month. Happy Black History Month as well. Take a moment to click the survey link, complete the survey link. If there are any more resources you want to share with each other, do so on the chat. And we are closing down. I'm not sure when. Huge shout out to Angelica from Public Advocates holding it down behind the scenes. Grabbing all the chat and questions. Okay, so thank you so much. This is a wrap. Appreciate you and see you next time.